Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 12th of September 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Well, it's a bit gloomy outside, although we did have a pretty good weekend here in Devon with quite a lot of sunshine. So that's okay.
Yeah. Retirement
is
Brian?
Not looking so good, apparently.
No. We mentioned this a week or two ago, the 5 things you should be doing to save for retirement. This was the advice from the Department for Work and Pensions. And if you remember, they said that number 1, you have to think about your plan to, you have to think about when you plan to retire. You have to plan for the lifestyle you want when you retire. You have to stay enrolled in your workplace pension. And we made the point that anybody that stayed enrolled in their British Home Stores pension didn't do so well, amongst others. You have to track down your lost pensions, apparently, because, of course, most people these days have, on average, 11 jobs through their working lives. And so they have a whole host of private pensions floating around out there that they may have forgotten about. So they've got to track those down. And they've then got to decide what to do with the pension savings, if there are any left. Because, as the Independent pointed out, as we mentioned, that there is a huge deficit spiral, pension deficit, rather, in private pensions in the UK, £100 billion in a single month this year. I think that was August. And I was pointing out the last time we spoke about this, that if you look at the public pension pot, we're looking at a black hole, a shortfall of £5 trillion or so, which is basically unrepayable. Well, you'll be pleased to know, Brian, that the government is setting up a dashboard. It's setting up a dashboard. This is Aviva Digital Garage, apparently, and they're setting up a prototype pensions dashboard. It's hard to keep a straight face with this stuff, and it's going to be ready by March 2017. And they're saying that the Treasury has successfully secured agreement from 11 of the largest pension providers: Aviva, Aon, HSBC, LV, Nest, Now Pensions, People's Pension, Royal London, Standard Life Zurich, and Willis Towers Watson, to build a prototype, of the first prototype of its kind. And what will this do? Well, the pensions dashboard is basically a pathetic little website that'll let you go to see where all your pension pots are, to help you track down ones that you've lost. And that's it, really. So they're not going to do anything to deal with the deficits in pensions, either public or private. They're going to create a dashboard so that you can see in how bad a situation you are. And then you can plan for that appropriately.
It's very interesting how this has all come about, Mike. I remember back in the early 90s, I think it was, that all of a sudden they were pushing private pensions very hard, trying to get people to ditch their civil service pensions in particular and take on those private pensions. Of course, nobody was talking about what the risks were. But it seems to me another example of creating instability, because in the public sector before that time, it was acknowledged that people generally had lower salaries, but they had the benefit of a larger and more secure pension. And then what did we do? We brought in privatisation and slowly but surely started to undermine all the secure base of those civil service jobs. Yep. Deliberate, I would say.
Absolutely. But of course, the public pension pot shortfall isn't just for civil service, public sector workers. It's also for everybody in the country that's entitled to a state pension at the end. So it's the state pensions as well. There's about half and half of that £5 trillion that's required in terms of obligations for those, which, will those obligations be met?
Right. Am I right here in thinking, of course, that the pension providers are closely aligned to the insurance companies?
Well, they tend to be. If you look at the names, Aviva, HSBC, a whole bunch of LV, yes, absolutely.
So these are the very organisations, of course, that we know have been desperate to close down any form of compensation payments to the child abuse victims, because the total figure they would owe is in the billions of pounds. So easy to see that we've got complete control from the financial sector here.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of the financial sector, here we've got Janet Yellen. This is the FT. Federal Reserve risks market shocks with September move. Now, similar, I suppose, to Hillary Clinton, Janet Yellen has had her little health quirks in the last period. But anyway, she is about to, or at least the Federal Reserve is about to announce what it's going to do with interest rates. The stock markets, it appears, are starting to price in what they expect to be a rise. So the FTSE 100 down 1.5% today, Dow Jones down 2%, Nasdaq 2.5%, Nikkei 1.73%, and so on. The truth is, nobody knows. Nobody really knows what they should do. I mean, I'm sure the Federal Reserve, you assume, know what they're going to announce by this stage. But the Financial Times article here really worrying about the fact that the markets are being what they describe as complacent about this. I think complacency is not the issue. The issue is that nobody knows what the Fed's going to do and what the outcome is likely to be when they do it. So we're in a strange situation at the moment. They're just making it up as they go along, basically.
The calm before the storm,
Absolutely,
essentially.
yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Syria. Of course, Syrian ceasefire was announced. This was on Friday at the end of the Geneva talks. John Kerry and Sergei Lavrov announcing plans for a new ceasefire in Syria. Kerry called it a comprehensive approach to Syrian reconciliation. We'll see. And the plans involve US and Russia calling on all sides to observe a nationwide stoppage of hostilities. Is that likely? We'll see how many barrel bombs come from eastern Aleppo into the west after this, which the ceasefire starts at sundown tonight, apparently. Now, Sputnik reported that Lavrov has said that Russia and the United States will be working with all parties to try to arrange the ceasefire. They said once that is done, a joint implementation center will be established. This will be used to track down terrorists and separate them from moderate opposition groups, after which joint aerial strikes will be carried out by both the US and Russian air forces against the terrorist groups. So there you go. Let's see what Boris Johnson had to say. I welcome the agreement that the US and Russia have reached to restore the cessation of hostilities and humanitarian access in Syria. I pay tribute to the tireless work of Secretary Kerry to bring us to this point, because Russia had nothing to do with it.
No, apparently not.
Absolutely.
But I'm glad I've had my hair cut, Mike, I must say, having a look at this man.
Yes. Well, that's him after he's had his haircut. So yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So moving on then, of course, North Korea let off a nuclear bomb apparently last week, and the United States very unhappy about that. So they are going to fly over South Korea with a bomber. There you go. That's what they're going to do. That is their response.
The word childish comes into my mind, Mike, actually, and I see some of this stuff now, and it is nearly unbelievable. It certainly is childish.
Yes. In the meantime, China and Russia, about to start today, I believe, Joint Sea 2016. These are the biggest naval drills that they've ever held jointly. And start today, PLA Navy spokesman Yang said that the drill will feature Navy surface ships, submarines, fixed-wing aircraft, shipborne helicopters, Marine Corps, amphibious armoured equipment from both navies. It's as well Britain's not involved in that.
Well, it'd be a bit difficult probably, and the water could be warm possibly, yes, Mike. Yes. Warm water, always a problem for the Royal Navy.
But I did notice that actually the latest US frigates, I think it was the frigate fleet, has been brought into port for similar problems. They keep breaking down as well, so it's not just a British problem.
No, well, this is all to do with procurement policy, and of course, as we've discussed with David Ellis, we've got huge problems now where private companies are simply running the agenda. So whereas before that you had experienced military technical people who'd got the lion's share of the drive on these things, you just have concepts, blue sky concepts brought into being. Yeah, nightmare.
Yes. So while the US continues to saber rattle in the South China Sea, and China and Russia obviously responding to that, we'll just reiterate once again that China still maintains a relatively positive outlook on life. and they are pushing this, or they have just completed the next stage of their high-speed rail. They now have, what's that, about 13,000 miles of high-speed rail network. And these are trains that are traveling 200 miles an hour or so. In fact, last week, they had some hyper high-speed rail lines. They had two trains passing each other in opposite directions at about 300 miles an hour each. And I believe that's the fastest such event that's ever taken place. And the Chinese also announced that they have licensed the Antonov 225 from Ukraine. So they're going to start building these aircraft, 6 engines. How many wheels, I do not know, but they can carry goodness knows what. Huge quantities of freight. That's the largest freight plane on the planet. So they're going to start building this again. They are looking at economic development rather than blowing up the planet.
And they haven't needed the European Union to help them do this, Mike, which is quite remarkable, isn't it?
Remarkable.
Because apparently no nation state can do any development on its own without the European Union.
Absolutely. So last week, obviously on Thursday, we had Vanessa Beeley on the program talking about the white helmets. She was pointing out to me today that the Middle East Institute has been identified as the organization which nominated the white helmets for the Nobel Peace Prize. And she also wanted to make the point that this gentleman, Robert Ford, who is the ex-US ambassador to Syria, is very closely aligned with that organization. So he, of course, is directly linked with al-Nusra, and financing al-Nusra and ISIS indirectly, I suppose. So this is the organization that has pushed forward for the Nobel Peace Prize for the white helmets. If anybody would care to write to them, perhaps.
And ask some questions.
Yes.
Yeah, it's the exposure element that works, and people asking questions is always very, very worrying for the other side. So if you haven't done something like that before, give it a try. Of course, it's always well-worded, short and polite letters, and only ask a couple of questions at a time. Some people will write a whole page of text, which is quite complicated, involving a number of subjects. And the more you write, the greater the amount of text, the easier it is for the other side to hide. So keep it short, just ask 1 or 2 questions. In fact, one gentleman who was very successful in breaking open the public sector fraud and corruption in Sheffield simply used 1 letter to put 1 question. And so although the process took longer, the overall effect was very good indeed.
Ian Crane has been away over the summer break. He's back tonight. Humanity versus Insanity. Tonight is Dr. Graham Downing, who's discussing what he's describing as the weaponization of the Zika virus. That's at 7:30 p.m. tonight. At 9 p.m, Fracking Nightmare, Ian's going to be joined by Brian Monk from Australia with an update from what's going on the fracking front over there. ukcolumn.org/live. If you want to watch it live, do join us.
Yeah, excellent. Well, we're going to get Common Purpose back into the frame. It's been very interesting how we've watched Common Purpose starting to work more and more overseas, whether it's in India or into Asia. And of course, former Prime Minister David Cameron's been heavily supporting Common Purpose. But in UK, a lot of their offices closed. And for a while, it looked as though they were easing back on their effort, but that's absolutely not the case. And a number of people have been sending us information. So let's have a look at some of the things that have come in. Julia Middleton, the lady in the blue fleece with holes on the right, was tweeting out. Now, some of this goes back to May, but it's what is actually going on that's of interest. That she's been having breakfast with a UK civil servant, and she can't believe that every current permanent secretary is male. So this lady's got a real vendetta about males, particularly white males. Interesting, though, that she was happy to work with those white male bankers when they were busy funding Common Purpose, even though it might have been Lehman Brothers or Deutsche Bank who are now in, well, worse than dire straits, of course, because Lehman Brothers have gone. But, of course, the thing is here, we don't know what was discussed. What was actually discussed at that breakfast meeting?
And which UK civil servant was it she was meeting?
Indeed. And of course, what we know is going on is this reframing agenda. Now, in the last few weeks, we've had some really exceptional information from north of the border in Scotland. And what individuals are talking about is the massive power that Common Purpose wields. And the report that goes with this is that the moment Common Purpose has appeared in a local authority, in comes the change in the whole culture, bullying, intimidation, people being sort of warned to behave themselves and stay in their post. And that agenda is now being picked up by, I'm going to say, ordinary people who are working in the public sector. So this is quite interesting to see. Well, the other thing, of course, that Common Purpose has always done is push forward a pro-European Union agenda. So here's Julia with her empty shopping bag. But remember, this woman can get into the highest levels of the British government. She's got no background in politics or the civil service, just some work with the industrial society and Demos. And that gives her the lead to be discussing with Francis Maude and others inside government. But here we are. She's forwarding tweets from other people, which are all promoting the European Union. And this is a key bit from our favourite subject, J.K. Rowling, who's been saying how outrageous it is that people have voted to leave the European Union. So she has tweeted out their information, which has come from the European Commission, telling us how we're all wrong in Britain if we thought that the best thing was to come out of the European Union. So if we just pop that one back on screen, Theo, thank you. And she's keeping the things in the family. We should get something else on screen. She's also recently tweeted out that her son is working over in Calais, helping set up houses for these poor people who've migrated. And she says any building material donations are very welcome. But of course, it's been Common Purpose that has held back the very people that have created the migration agenda. So we'll pop that back in our basket. And we just asked the same question. How is it that this woman, backed originally by massive international banks such as Deutsche Bank, who says in her book that the work of East German bankers is exceptional, they're all there to help society, Mike, how does this woman wield the power that she does at the highest levels of government? Well, let's have a look at this one, which was sent in to us. A little bit small on screen, but I'll give you the meat of it in a minute. This is to do with Doncaster Metropolitan Borough Council, and Common Purpose has been in helping to train some of the social work department. So I'll leave that there for a second, so you can always freeze it later if you want to have a look at that document. But let's bring in the main part of the text. And somebody said, what exactly was the Common Purpose training about? And this is the response. In June 2014, Doncaster Council, on behalf of Team Doncaster and the Health and Social Care Transformation Board, led the commissioning of a programme of work to build capacity to enable health and social care workers in Doncaster to implement and adapt the Better Care Fund Plan. The Better Care Fund Plan outlines the vision for care workers services in 2018-19 and the difference it will make to patient and service user outcomes. Are you with me at this stage, Mike?
Haven't got a clue.
Okay, well, stay with it because it gets better. Despite the available evidence base and challenge to implement what we already know works, there is an increasing need for Doncaster partners to connect parts of the system together, look for new ideas and ways of thinking, develop a common language, and collaborate around the compelling challenge of producing the best health and care system in the UK by 2020. The partners also wanted to build capacity across the health and care sector. Now, many people will be saying, of course, this is absolute nonsense, it's meaningless, but we say, no, this is very, very dangerous language. This is Common Purpose injected hypnotic language, And what you are doing is dragging people to use a particular type of language that takes them nowhere. So this is not going to improve services. This is not going to look after people who need the care. This is simply to keep the management team talking a language that sounds good.
A common language.
A common language, but actually achieves absolutely nothing.
I thought English was our common language.
Well, not for common purpose, because cultural intelligence tells Julia Middleton that you've got to involve all societies and nations and all languages, apparently, to use common purpose language. So how much do you think you should be paying in order to train managers to speak complete gobbledygook? Well, we've pleased to say that we've also had this information sent in. So following a freedom of information, we can see here that Common Purpose was being paid a mere £54,400 of taxpayers' money for what? VAT on top of that. So I think the bill reaches whatever it is, 60-odd thousand pounds. And what have they been doing? Well, they've been training social workers to do what? We're not too sure.
Nothing.
Well, let's remind ourselves, of course, this is the same Common Purpose that failed to take any action when UK Column many years ago and others were pointing out that there were no CRB checks being conducted on Common Purpose trainers. And here we had one of their advisory board members who has been sent to prison. So this is Common Purpose advisory board member in the Wirral, Matthew Barren, and he's been jailed indefinitely for sadistic sex attacks on prostitutes. This is from a couple of years ago. His actions horrific. In one attack, he whipped the woman up to 40 times until her blood sprayed 6 foot up his bedroom walls. He then used a plastic bag to suffocate the vice worker until she saw black spots in front of her eyes and believed she was going to die. In another assault, a woman passed out from the pain only to discover Barren had used a sexual implement to torture her. And of course, he was also found with nearly 9,000 obscene pictures of children, as well as a collection of violent pornography. Now, of course, it was UK Column and cpexposed.com that pointed out that this man was working with young people. And of course, as a Common Purpose advisory board member, he had been put forward by Common Purpose to help select other members of the community to join the Common Purpose secretive networks. What sort of person do you think Matthew Barren might have chosen, Mike?
Psychopaths like himself.
Psychopaths like himself, but of course Common Purpose refused to answer any questions about what actions they'd taken to track down the people he'd been in contact with. And there were other people involved with paedophilia and Common Purpose exposed. So just the organisation to be in training social workers. And I'll just say that again from north of the border, we've heard an interesting anecdotal story that in Common Purpose training sessions, one of the hot topics that people were challenged on was child abuse. Now, what was going on there, we're not too sure, but we're expecting more information in the coming weeks. The change agenda, basically, Mike.
Yes, indeed. So the change agenda, well, before we get onto that in detail, here is a report on the border after Brexit. And what are they saying? Basically, that the Borders Agency, of course, run by Common Purpose graduates itself, isn't receiving enough money from government, and therefore immigration continues to be a problem. And that situation is only going to get worse as time goes on. And they're basically saying that this is the Adam Smith Institute, basically saying that the government needs to spend money on a computer system which will allow them to pre-screen people as they before they board aircraft and boats as they come to this country. And I just wanted to highlight that report because what's being called for is the same situations we have for entry into the United States at the moment. And I just wanted to ask your view on this. Is this heading towards a point where basically we can't travel without being pre-screened, no matter where we're going globally. And in fact, we may end up with restrictions on travel, therefore. I mean, obviously terrorism is being used as the excuse for this, but immigration itself is not being used as the excuse for this.
Well, I think this is exactly where we're going. We are to become a prison island, I think, is the agenda, Mike. And of course, they can now say, oh, we've got to screen everybody. We can't really cope with this massive immigration, which has been deliberately created. So you're going to be fingerprinted, iris scanned through the other device, which essentially takes a picture of you. And all of that data is going to be stored and used. And we already know, of course, they're talking about stopping you travelling if you perhaps haven't paid your TV licence.
Absolutely.
So this is Prison Camp UK. And maybe some viewers or listeners will think this is an odd comment, but I was always fascinated by watching the film Johnny English, where the French king, when he was getting very upset, said that he would dump all of the rubbish into Britain. He would put up fences around the borders, and Britain would be a prison camp on the edge of what was essentially the European Union map. Now, if that was humour within the Johnny English film, it was very, very accurate in describing what we're now starting to see. But I'll leave you to think about that.
Now, last week we mentioned that Theresa May was going to be bringing back grammar schools. And I just wanted to quote a little bit from the speech. I'm not going to talk about grammar schools at all. It's just the preamble to her speech I wanted to comment on. So here she is. Apparently, we're facing a moment of great change as a nation. As we leave the European Union, we must define an ambitious new role for ourselves in the world. She wants this country to be the world's great meritocracy. She wants Britain to be a place where advantage is based on merit, not privilege. And she's saying that this is the change we need. It will mean changing some of the philosophy underpinning, this is the key point, changing some of the philosophy underpinning how government thinks and acts. In other words, constitutional reform. She says, I don't pretend this change will be easy. Change rarely is. But this is the change we need if we're to make Britain the great meritocracy I want it to be. Over the coming weeks and months, the government will set out an ambitious programme of economic and social reform that will help us make this change and build a true meritocracy in our country. So I really just wanted to give a heads up. This is what's coming. We've got to watch carefully what Theresa May proposes. Because if she's talking about an ambitious programme of economic and social reform, and she's talking about changing the philosophy underpinning government, those are really significant changes to the entire constitution of the nation.
Which nobody's been asked about outright, of course.
Absolutely. But it's not just Theresa May that's talking about it, because here's Demos, our favourite think tank, and they're holding an event on the 4th of October. A country that works. Can the government deliver Brexit and domestic reform? And they say, delighted to be joined at the Conservative Party conference by George Freeman MP, who's chair of the Prime Minister's Policy Board, to discuss the challenges the government faces in delivering on social justice at home while negotiating Britain's exit from the European Union. So they are going to be discussing exactly this agenda on the 4th of October. So we'll keep an eye on that one as well.
Demos, of course, an organisation with a completely Marxist background that has been attacking British society for many years. And just a reminder, I did mention it then, but of course, Julia Middleton, closely aligned to the Demos organisation. Just amazing. Security services don't seem interested in that angle anymore. Subversion in the country, you can carry out. The intelligence services, security services, not interested.
Absolutely.
Why would that be, I wonder?
Absolutely.
I think I know.
Yes. And at the heart of the constitutional reform agenda, I need to put my teeth back in today, here is the Centre for Cities. And they are discussing if Parliament moves out of London, it should go to the highest bidder. And this is a blind auction is what they're calling for. So what they're saying is last week's warning of a select committee that the Palace of Westminster should be vacated for urgent repair work has once again raised the possibility of Parliament moving out of London altogether, with MPs, commentators and activists all making the case for other places to be the new home of UK democracy. Ultimately, it's probably unlikely that MPs will move out of the House of Commons. Never mind Parliament moving out of the capital altogether. But let's imagine how that the decision was taken to rehouse the seat of democracy. Two related questions would need to be addressed. Where would it go? And what process should be used to decide its new location? So he then is calling for a blind auction, Brian, to decide where it goes, and the highest bidder, whichever city bids the highest amount of money. Who would pay for this rabble to go to their city? I'm not quite sure. I'm pretty sure.
Well, that's one thing, but of course we know the agenda is to get the seat of our Parliament out of London. That creates the international city region, which they wanted. And of course, we've seen over the last 10, 15 years, all of the key government agencies moved out of London. So instead of that being the centre of government, it was all dispatched. The MOD went to Bath. That was all part of the agenda. And now those building repairs, £7 billion worth, allegedly, nobody has seen any documentation, says that we've got to get the MPs out. This is the final dismantling of the UK, absolutely. I think, Mike.
Yes.
And I was interested, if Theo, if you just pop that back on the screen, I couldn't help but notice the colours on this one. Like the Centre for Cities, perfect common purpose colours there, the blue and the common purpose. Sorry, the green and the
green and the purple.
Yes,
common purpose colours appearing on a number of different websites. Centre for Cities is one. Joseph Rowntree Foundation, another one. I'm starting to see it more and more often at the moment.
And this is the collaboration at work.
Yes.
Well, let's get into the heart of the beast, and what better place to go than here? I saw this newspaper a couple of weeks ago. I didn't buy it at the time, but when I saw this edition, I just had to get a copy to have a look at what it was. The New European, it calls itself Pop-Up Press, and this is just the most unbelievable pro-EU propaganda. But as you can see on the front, it's making very big of Eddie Izzard. And Theo, if you can just switch back, I'd like to show people. Here's a copy of the paper. You can probably hear me rustling it in the background while Mike was speaking. And so you know the calibre, here we are. Here's Eddie Izzard. Now he's got lipstick on. He's wearing a delightful pink lipstick, which matches his pink beret. And he's got his nails done, and they're in red, apart from one finger, which is the Union Jack, and the other finger, which is the EU Ring of Stars. And this man, they're saying, is the man who should become champion to take on all of those naughty voters who voted to come out of the European Union. So if you want to know what this newspaper thinks, they think that the best man to run this nation, to make sure we make the right decisions, is Eddie Izzard. Okay, well, it's not a joke, of course, because as we're going to see, this organisation's got quite some clout. This is one of the earlier editions, and the front has got a joke on it. The couple on the sofa are saying, I wonder if dogs think, and the dog says, these idiots voting to leave the EU, creating a future of uncertainty and instability that will have a knock-on effect for generations to come, leading to isolation and beleaguerment for this once great nation. So there you are, fear, fear. But if you voted to leave, this paper says you're an idiot. And of course, the other message there, the subliminal part of that message, is that you're really a dog. It's pretty nasty stuff. So who's been putting it out? Well, let's have a look at this. Here we are, Archant Community Media Limited. Now, I'd really encourage people to go and have a good trawl through the website. You can find them on LinkedIn as well. And what are they boasting about? Well, they are basically boasting that they control a huge number of local papers. And of course, this is a scam in many areas, that we think we're buying a local paper with local news interests at heart. But in fact, what you're buying is something controlled by very powerful people in another part of the country.
I mean, this is the devolution big society model. This is exactly how it works. You think that you're buying local government. You think that you're buying a local newspaper.
Yeah.
In fact, it's local control from the centre.
Yeah, local control from the centre, absolutely right. So let's have a look at some of the key players, and we'll bring in this gentleman here. Here he is, Matt Kelly. He's the architect, really, behind the New European. He calls himself Chief Content Officer. He says, we're currently in an extraordinary period of time in the UK with all of society seemingly in a state of flux and turmoil. I believe the 48% who voted to remain are not well served by the traditional press, and there's a clear opportunity for a newspaper like the New European that people will want to read and carry like a badge of honour. I think he might mean a berry of honour, presumably a pink one. And he goes on. This is a bit of information in the article in which he is featured. Archant owns more than 130 brands, here we are, across the UK, including the Eastern Daily Press and local TV station Mustard TV, employing more than 470 editorial staff. And this is the key thing now. This is social, being migrated across to social media, bringing in the TV side. We can give you a bit more here. So second part of this. Kelly leaves Local World, where there's been a merger of more than 100 titles from Daily Mail and General Trust, Northcliffe Media and Ilif News and Media after 18 months in the role. So what this man specialises in is hoovering up all the small newspapers and getting them into one big title, which then claims to be a local newspaper. Well, here he is. Here's the man with his lipstick and eyeliner and fingers. I think we should make him Prime Minister because clearly he'd be able to sort out all the problems in the country. But they're putting him forward as the new expert on Brexit. What would other nations think of us at this point, Mike? We just pick a country overseas, anywhere. What would they actually think of UK at this point?
Probably better not to say.
Absolutely. Well, they're pretty hard on Theresa May because here she is as one of the, presumably the witches of Eastwick, the godmother, they've labelled her as. But actually, they're quite accurate because they're saying we're still pre-Brexit, and their big crowing point is that Theresa May is talking a lot but has done absolutely nothing to get us out of the EU. They have another double-page spread hammering her with "Dither away, Mrs. May." And the other article there says the real battle for an open Britain has only just begun. So because people have voted to leave the EU, we are not an open society and we need to be re-educated to become one.
Yeah.
Okay, and let's just hop on to the next one. This one made me feel quite ill. It's a double-page spread crowing at problems north of the border, falling oil revenues. But it's saying, well, the good news is the fish stocks are increasing. And then they're trying to claim that, I think it's since 2004, the number of fishermen in Scotland has increased. Well, of course, who destroyed the British fishing industry? It was the European Union. So this is more spin and propaganda. So if I join the pieces for you, it's always good to do this. Here's Archant, roughly 130 million available for their media merry-go-round. Have a look at the board. This is just a couple of their team. But the gentleman on the left there has been involved with Fox News. So he's quite well connected. And the one on the right has been working with Filmflex, I think it's called. But the name that popped out was Walt Disney Company. Yeah. So it does seem to me that Eddie Izzard's in his Pinkberry is a bit more Walt Disney than the Daily Mail, for example. So who's in the background? The Guardian, because they're using the Guardian print centre. So that's all pretty cosy. Here's another gentleman here from the board. Interesting man, because he was previously Pearson Education.
We're back into common purpose.
We're back into common purpose. Have a look at Pearson Education if you haven't seen it. They are going to sort our children out for us. And of course, let's remember that it was Sir David Bell, formerly Pearson, that with Julia Middleton and the Media Standards Trust, attempted to let Lord Leveson get government control of the media. So there's the little link. We go through from Pearson Group to David Bell. And oh, look, there just happens to be The Guardian which of course told porcupines over Millie Dowler's texts in order to try and stir up trouble for Leveson. This is very dangerous stuff, Mike.
Yeah.
Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our news today. I'd like to say thank you very much for the individuals who've made some very kind and generous donations for the Doherty family. We are making arrangements for those donations to reach Brian and Janice in the next few days. And I can say donations very timely because Brian and Janice are under quite extreme financial pressure at the moment. So thank you very much for doing that. And also a big thank you to other people who've sent us into some really excellent information around the Dohertys. And as always, I'm pleased to say we are getting very good information from inside some of the public sector bodies north of the border, people who know about the Doherty case and are not happy. And we've also had more information from retired Police Scotland officers who are also not happy with what's going on north of the border. And I believe, Mike, some of them have been triggered by this cynical media ploy by Police Scotland that they're launching a child abuse campaign that you mentioned last week.
Yeah.
So that's it for today. Thank you very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.